So, Daniel Cameron, thank you so much for joining me
My
today.
pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, let's start with the overall role of the Attorney General. What do you feel is the role of the Attorney General, and what's not currently being done with that office that you would like to do if you are elected?
Well, I see the role of the Attorney General and the thing that I've been advocating since I got in this race on January 22nd is really the responsibility to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky and really reclaiming the role of Chief Law Enforcement Officer. The other thing I find incredibly important is that we enforce and defend the laws that are passed by the General Assembly. I juxtapose that, contrast that with the way that the office has been run over the last 3.5 years. I think you've had an office, an Attorney General who's been more fixated on the idea of being a Chief Legislative Officer and a Chief Policy Officer rather than the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, and advocating and working with our Commonwealth's attorneys and our county attorneys and our law enforcement community more globally. So I look forward to be able to work in that capacity, being able to help be the tip of the spear in terms of confronting the drug epidemic that we have here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I think the law enforcement community is ready for that.
Now, in the last couple of years, especially, there's been some disagreements between attorney generals and governors, and we typically have them of different parties. So there's a possibility that you could be working with Andy Beshear in the governor's office or Matt Bevin. So how would you work with either of them, and do you feel that if you are in that office, it would be the same kind of contentious relationship?
Well, the Office of Attorney General, the race for Attorney General is independently elected, and so I look forward to working with whomever's in the governor's mansion. I think the responsibility of the Attorney General is independent of who's in the mansion. The public safety challenges that we have here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky really have no Republican or Democrat designation by them. So I'm willing to work with whomever wants to help improve the public safety outcomes here we have in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And my responsibility is to the United States Constitution and the Kentucky Constitution, and I look forward to meeting that obligation and responsibility after the November 5th election.
Now, if you are elected on November 5th, you would be the first Republican Attorney General in quite some time. So what do you think that means for the state?
Well, I think it means that there would be an Attorney General here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky that is really supportive of and protecting the rule of law here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. You'd have somebody in this role that I think has the values consistent with the majority of Kentuckians. I think folks want, in many ways, to depoliticize the office of Attorney General and make sure that we get back to what I've been talking about as the bread and butter basics of the Attorney General's office, which is really being a support partner, a good partner to our federal and state law enforcement community, and defending and enforcing the laws that are passed by the General Assembly. So I think it's been a while since we've had someone that looks at this job and recognizes the great importance that it has in the administration of the government of the Commonwealth. I look forward to providing continuity and stability in the Attorney General's office, because I don't think we've had that in a while. I think we've had individuals that have run for this office just as a stepping stone to another office. And I think the law enforcement community is tired of that, and I look forward to being able to work very closely with them over the next decade.
Now, you bring up defending and upholding the laws that have been passed. The last two attorney generals, at least, have had some, reservations about defending certain laws that they don't necessarily agree with personally. There was the same-sex marriage issue with Jack Conway. So how would you deal with that in this office? Would you be comfortable defending a law that Kentucky has that you don't necessarily agree with personally?
Well, my responsibility, as I noted earlier, is to the United States Constitution and the Kentucky Constitution, and so that would, in many ways, educate my decisions in that process. But I really do believe when you take the oath to be the Attorney General, you make a commitment to defend and enforce the laws that are passed by the General Assembly, and I commit to do that. I think the Kentuckians are tired of an activist Attorney General, someone who sits on the sidelines. When Kentuckians send their elected representatives to Kentucky to make the policy judgments, I think they want those to be pushed forward, and I think they want an Attorney General that's going to defend those laws. And so I look forward to being able to have the opportunity to do that.
Recently, there's been a lot of laws passed by the General Assembly that are then sued by the Attorney General, especially because of the way that they were passed, the legislative process. That's been done for many years, the way that these couple bills were passed, but this time they've been sued over it. So, and the Attorney General won in those cases. So would you follow that same pattern if you saw the General Assembly passing a bill in that way? Would you also?
Well, I think my responsibility is to the Constitution and the United States Constitution and Kentucky Constitution. But what I will say on that fact is I think that General Beshear has not done any of the litigation or filed lawsuits on any of the litigation because it was for Kentuckians, for the men, women, and children of all of 120 counties. I think instead it was to placate his very liberal base and give him a platform for which to run for governor. Again, he came into this office 3.5 years ago, not viewing it as a role as the chief law enforcement officer, but really viewing it as a chief legislative officer, a chief policy officer, really wanting to insert himself into the legislative process because he wanted to give himself an opportunity to run for governor. Again, I see this as a job that requires immediate attention, someone who wants the job of Attorney General, somebody who wants to work closely with our law enforcement community. I spent 2.5 years as Senator McConnell's general counsel in Washington, D.C. During that period of time, I was very proud of the opportunity to help the Kentucky law enforcement community by bringing in additional dollars to the Office of National Drug Control Policy. So they know where my heart is. They know that I recognize the responsibility of this office is great and large, especially in light of the drug epidemic that we have here and the challenges that we have confronting us in the public safety sphere over this next decade. And so my attention will be with the law enforcement community. My responsibility is to defend and enforce the laws that are passed by the General Assembly. And I'm going to take every opportunity to make sure that people over the next decade know that I'm in it for the men, women, and children of all 120 counties and improving the public safety outcomes that we have here in the Commonwealth.
You bring up the drug epidemic, and here in Kentucky, we have really struggled with the opioid crisis. And nationally, there have been a lot of attorney generals who are getting involved in suing pharmaceutical companies for the damages. How would you get involved in that fight?
Well, we're going to litigate and prosecute whomever, drug traffickers, pharmaceutical companies, whomever is peddling this poison in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Kentucky's really been the epicenter for the drug epidemic and the opioid crisis in particular. And so we're going to do whatever we can. I'll make note that the Republican Attorney General in Oklahoma, Mike Hunter, just got a big assessment in a jury verdict in Oklahoma against Johnson & Johnson. That was a Republican Attorney General that got that. And here in Kentucky against Purdue Pharma, we got a paltry $24 million in that settlement, and that was with a Democratic AG. I'm standing with the Republican Attorney General in Oklahoma and making sure that Kentucky gets what it deserves in terms of reimbursement and retribution in terms of the poison that has been peddled here in the Commonwealth. And so we're going to make sure that we do everything we possibly can to litigate those matters and really hold accountable those that have brought the poison into the Commonwealth.
Let's shift to the politics of this race. And I want to hear what you feel are the biggest differences between you and Democratic candidate Greg Stembo in this race.
Well, I think I offer a new and bold vision for the Attorney General's office and getting back to the bread and butter basics of really enforcing and defending the laws that are passed by the General Assembly and being the chief law enforcement officer here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Meanwhile, my opponent, Mr. Stembo, offers more broken promises, more broken leadership, a broken Frankfurt, a broken pension system. I will remind you that when he was the Speaker of the House and when he had an opportunity to work on the pension challenges for teachers here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, he didn't do that. He opted instead to fully fund his pension and give himself a pension for life. Meanwhile, our teachers are suffering under the regime that he established in Frankfurt. So the hypocrisy on his part, really, to talk about being a leader, I think most Kentuckians will recognize that he's not right for this office. He also offered legislation, in my judgment, in 2013 that was bad for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. He would have essentially given driver's licenses to illegal immigrants and told our federal law enforcement community that they can't track those individuals. I think if you're running to be the chief law enforcement officer here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, you have to commit to being a good partner to our state law enforcement community and our federal law enforcement community. He, on the other hand, decided not to do that. So I think in many ways he's forfeited his opportunity to be the Attorney General. I think Kentuckians are tired of the politics of the past and the infighting that we've seen in Frankfurt. They want a new start in the Attorney General's office, and that's what we're offering with the Cameron campaign.
So because you were representing a new start with your campaign, and this race in particular, a lot of people are focused on this even more than the governor's race in some ways, because it's such a, opportunity for Republicans to have this office again. So do you expect this race to get very nasty up until Election Day in the next coming weeks?
Well, I expect there to be a contrast between myself and Mr. Stembo. I think if you go across the Commonwealth, whether you're talking to Republicans or Democrats, they're very familiar with Mr. Stumbo's experience. Again, broken promises in Frankfurt under the Stumbo leadership, broken pensions in Frankfurt under the Stumbo leadership, broken leadership under Stumbo while he was Speaker of the House. In fact, he was so known to his own constituents in his district in 2016 that they actually rejected him and voted someone else in. So I think come this November 5th, all of Kentucky is going to reject Mr. Stumbo as well.
Now, on this campaign trail, what are some of the biggest issues you're hearing about from voters? What are some of the things that people are the most concerned about, especially when it comes to this office?
Well, I think the big thing, of course, that I hear is folks really want somebody in this office that's going to focus on the drug epidemic. They find it incredibly important that there be leadership in this office to help reestablish the credibility of the office as the chief law enforcement office here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We also hear a lot about elder fraud issues here in the Commonwealth, which is something that if I'm Attorney General, we're going to make sure that we're very diligent in working with our elder population, our senior citizens, to make sure that they're not being defrauded or scammed in any way. The other thing that we hear a lot about are robocalls, and really we're going to crack down on robocalls. We're going to work with our telecom companies to make sure that there's softwares in place to identify robocalls and make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can in the Attorney General's office to really rid folks' phones of those annoyances that they receive during the day. So those are a couple of the issues that I think we're hearing all across the Commonwealth, and I look forward to engaging on those topics in the coming years.
And finally, I want to give you an opportunity to give your final pitch to voters in the next couple weeks of why you should be the next Attorney General of the Commonwealth.
Well, I think I should be the next Attorney General and look forward to being the Attorney General after the November 5th election, because really this is a contest between the future and the past. Like I mentioned earlier, you can either go back to the past with Greg Stumbo and his broken promises and broken pensions and broken leadership in Frankfurt, or you can be given a new opportunity, a new start in the Attorney General's office, someone who wants to reclaim and renew the promise of the Attorney General's office as the Chief Law Enforcement Office here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, working closely with our law enforcement community, advocating for our Commonwealth attorneys and our county attorneys, and our Kentucky sheriffs, our Fraternal Order of Police, all the groups that are day in, day out fighting the drug epidemic. So I look forward to working on behalf of all Kentuckians, the men, women, and children of all 120 counties to improve our public safety outcomes here in the Commonwealth.